What's up, everybody? It's Yong here with my thoughts and impressions on The Division. The open beta concluded not too long ago, and after spending hours with the game, I came out on the other end with mixed feelings. On the one hand, the story missions and PvE-related stuff was actually pretty fun. This had in large part to do with some really solid gameplay mechanics and controls. At its core, The Division is a cover-based third-person shooter. While it's not mechanically the best shooter I've ever played, and while I did have some gripes with the controls, like how rolling and taking cover are assigned to the same button, X, which can lead to accidents like taking cover when you want to roll away and vice versa, as well as things like having to double-tap triangle to switch to your sidearm, which was at times unresponsive. The mechanics were still solid enough that moving from cover to cover and strategically taking out bad guys yielded a good sense of satisfaction. Now, enemies are spongier than normal due to the MMORPG nature of the game, but as long as there isn't too much disparity in levels between you and your enemies, and with the exception of a few bosses, taking down enemies is only a matter of a few well-placed shots, but overall do expect to shell out more bullets than in a typical FPS. Oh, and definitely aim for the head. I was also pleased to find that the enemy AI in The Division is actually pretty smart, with enemies constantly using and changing between covers effectively, and continuously attempting to flank you and push forward as shootouts progress, which makes combat that much more fun. On top of the solid mechanics and fun combat, The Division's PvE also has a really nice sense of progression. Leveling is fairly standard, involving killing enemies or completing tasks, but what separates this game from other RPGs is the way your base of operations is tied into leveling. A big part of The Division's story revolves around building up a base of operations to fight off imminent threats and to find ways to stop the smallpox pandemic that has caused the collapse of the United States. The base features 3 wings: medical, tech, and security. Each of those wings is tied to one of your 3 skill trees. As you complete missions and encounters, you will earn supply points for each respective wing that you can later spend towards new components and parts to rebuild each of those wings, which in turn yields new skills and perks. It feels very organic and well integrated within the setting, story, and world of The Division. The beta only featured a handful of skills like your standard healing skill or enemy detection skill from the medical wing tree, a sticky bomb shooter or a deployable turret from the tech wing tree, and a ballistic shield from the security tree, but each skill felt unique. Testing out all of the other unlockable skills and perks and combining them to adhere to my own playstyle is definitely something to look forward to in the final game. Add on top of that the loot that yields from missions and encounters to customize your character's armament and equipment, and you've got yourself plenty of reasons to venture a desolate and ravaged New York. My only hope is that the story will be compelling enough to keep players going. So far, it's pretty much been your standard fare pandemic disaster story. There's enough there to serve as a foundation for the gameplay, but nothing in the narrative that has captured my attention so far. But obviously, the beta only represents a small portion of the final game, so I'll reserve judgment until then. But so far, the story's been forgettable. I will say, however, that the presentation is excellent. The one-shot cinematic cutscenes are very Phantom Pain-esque and very well executed. The voice acting is pretty good, the animations are smooth, and it doesn't hurt that The Division's game world is really pretty to look at. While it doesn't live up to what was shown at E3 when the game was unveiled, there is no denying that it still looks pretty good and that it has awesome atmosphere. There was the occasional pop-up when fast traveling and whatnot, but for the most part, I felt very immersed in the world. It is especially fun to traverse the world with friends, whether they be people you know or people you randomly met online. Tackling encounters and story missions with friends can actually yield some memorable moments. The Division's greatest strengths, I would say, definitely lie in co-op. On the other hand, the game's PvP component, the Dark Zone, left a lot to be desired. Now again, it's important to keep in mind that the game is still in beta, but as of now, if I had to describe the Dark Zone in one word, it would be stagnant. This separate area is basically an emptier, slower, and less compelling version of the PvE zone, featuring tougher and spongier enemies, albeit with better loot. That's really the main draw of the Dark Zone, finding better loot. Unfortunately, that task gets pretty boring and repetitive very quickly. Now, the Dark Zone does employ some interesting concepts. The loot that you pick up in the Dark Zone doesn't immediately become yours to use, because of how contaminated the area is. You first have to call a chopper to an extraction zone and drop off your loot so that it can be decontaminated. Only by successfully doing so will your loot be secured and ready for use. The catch is that if you die or if anyone kills you along the way, you will drop any hard-earned loot you collected in the Dark Zone. So right off the bat, the ability to steal unsecured loot gives players incentive to betray each other. Now, the consequence of killing somebody is that the second you engage another player, you will for a time be marked as a rogue agent. What that does is basically place a big fat bullseye on your head that will allow other players to kill you without consequence. On top of that, if you are killed by another player while rogue, they are rewarded with some of your Dark Zone experience points, which go into increasing the Dark Zone specific level, aka the Dark Zone rank. So yes, if you are a rogue agent and get killed, you lose Dark Zone experience points, and it's entirely possible to de-level. And on top of all that, if you're killed as a rogue agent, you'll drop your unsecured loot, further incentivizing players to go after rogues. So it's this whole vicious cycle, and you really can't fully trust anyone in the Dark Zone. At any given moment, anyone can decide to betray and steal loot at the expense of going rogue. So for a time, you will be hunted by other players, and your goal becomes to stay alive until the timer runs out and you revert back to a non-hostile agent. And of course, engaging any other non-rogue agents while rogue will extend that timer. The helicopter extraction zones in particular are a highly contested area. Once an extraction chopper is summoned, everyone in the area is informed of this, and it takes about a minute and a half for it to arrive. In that time, you may find players stalking the extraction zone with the intention of killing others right before the extraction chopper arrives to steal their loot and claim them for themselves. Or you may find an entire party of rogue agents awaiting the extraction chopper to extract stolen loot while defending the area as non-rogue players attempt to take them out. It's also entirely possible for loot extraction to happen peacefully without any bloodshed. You really never know. The dangers and unpredictability of the Dark Zone are definitely its greatest strengths, and there is definitely a lot of potential here. Unfortunately, as of now, there's just not much else to do in the Dark Zone other than going on a loot scavenger hunt, which very quickly becomes boring and repetitive. That's the biggest challenge that The Division faces: stagnation. Maybe it's doing too good of a job of immersing players into a drab, desolate, and ravaged New York setting. While I love the atmosphere, playing the game can't feel drab. It has to be fun. And in many respects it is. It's got solid shooting and RPG mechanics, a compelling progression system, a beautiful and atmospheric world inhabited by other players, great presentation, and some very interesting and unique concepts. But none of that will amount to much without the proper amount and variety of interactive content, especially if the content isn't compelling enough to keep players hooked. The Division has a solid foundation, but what will make it or break it is its ability to maintain longevity. I'm actually not too worried about the fun PvE aspect of the game, save for the possibility of a lackluster and forgettable story, but the Dark Zone needs a bit more padding before it can become something that'll keep me coming back every day. Now, it's entirely possible that many of these problems I had with the beta will be addressed once all the content is there in the final game, but all we can do right now is wait and see. I really want this game to be good, and I think it has incredible potential, but after what Ubisoft has pulled in the past, it's becoming more and more difficult to be optimistic. I just hope that Ubisoft's ambition doesn't surpass their ability to deliver, like in the past. So there you have it, folks. My thoughts, impressions, and hopes of The Division. Thank you for tuning in. Our opinions may vary, so let us know in the comments below what your experience has been like with the game. And to be further updated on gaming news, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out!